All. So let me welcome all our coaches, aspiring coaches, fellow travelers, and I really wish that each one of you are safe, stocked up well, like I say, with all the essentials of love, faith, positivity, trust, and have really enveloped yourselves and your families with a circle of safety and positivity. In doing that, I can assure you that the external lockdown is not going to affect your internal journey back to your source, however which way you define it. So it gives me immense joy to be back here with each one of you and see so many familiar faces. And like I said earlier, to just have that visual contact with all of you during this period of lockdown is so enriching. And it's amazing, all your response and your support. Anything that we do is fantastic. I appreciate it greatly. There have been so many questions that have come in for today's session, and all of them are so deep and meaningful. I've tried to weave them together into a story that will be interesting and will have a narrative that we flow through, and I'm sure each one of you will enjoy it. My immense gratitude to Mr. Rajeev Dubey for being here. He is somebody that I have known from a distance, actually, and admired for, I think, at least 20 years. I've been following him in different formats, either any conference that he has been one of the speakers. I will ensure that I attend the conference, whether it's paid or unpaid. I'll ensure I get a space to be there. And from being one person right at the back of the hall in a pool of maybe 1,000 people, just to hear him speak is how my journey with Mr. Dubey, he may not even know about it, began, but that's really been my engagement with him over so many years. And I have a distinct memory of running up to him just to get his visiting card. And I think I have at least 3 or 4 of his visiting cards with me, kept with him, really. And the idea of really getting his visiting card more than anything else, because I never end up really contacting him until very recently. But the idea was that I just wanted to go up so close and see, is this person real? You know, I mean, everything that he speaks about and really touches my heart so deeply. And from a speck in the audience, I just wanted to go up and get a really close view. And that's really been the impact, sir, that you've had on me. And I feel fortunate that as the years have passed, the distance has become narrow, the bridges have come closer, and I've had the opportunity to work with you recently on a project in Mahindra. And through all these different threads, I think what has stood out and what has remained and which has stayed with me always, and what has touched me deeply personally, is the maxim that I see you say every time, whether it is up from a podium or it is in your conversations, or even on your whiteboard in your office. I found it so distinctly written, Satya, Prem, and Seva. And that really touched me deeply, not just because of the consistency with which I've seen it, but I really hold that in everything that I've heard you say, and how the little that I've had an opportunity to see how you conduct yourself, I feel that you embody every word of that. And that really to me is a blessing. That to me is the homecoming, when you can embody what you stand for. And therefore, I'm so privileged and deeply honored that you agreed to be at this session. And it's beyond my admiration. I have great love and respect for everything that you do, that you stand for, all that you shared with me so openly and so freely in terms of how you're planning to spend your retired life after having spent almost, 4 decades, I would say, in the industry. And to be here today is very special. We have on our call today, we've had approximately 87 people who registered for the session very, very quickly. And we have people who have been trained, are trained coaches. Large portion of them are trained coaches. I would say a majority of them are trained by my mentor and someone who you've also met, Peter Redding. And there are some people who are on the call who are to be trained. And I thought that it would be important to open up this door to them as well, because we had to, reschedule our program on account of this lockdown. So I thought it would be meaningful to invite them into this special session. So I think that if I were to create the linkage between the work that Peter and I do together and what you stand for, there, and the work that you've done and continue to pursue, I think three things stand out for me. One is the sense of positivity. The other is really the sense of purposeful action. And the third is a loving presence. And that's really how I have received you. That's the kind of work that Peter and I engage in and try and embody. And so it feels good to build that connecting dot. So I'm going to invite you, sir, to really share a little bit about yourself, whichever way you'd like, and the linkage that you see to the work that we do as individual human beings, whether we're coaches or whether leaders in an organization or even homemakers or entrepreneurs, just as individuals. How would you connect it with what I say is your maxim of Satya, Prem, and Seva? Please, sir.
Okay, so thank you so much, Amrita, and hello to everybody. Thank you for giving so much of your time. Amrita, you do me far more honor and credit than I deserve. Having said that, I'm grateful and delighted, at the same time embarrassed and humbled. And the minute I say humbled, I have to quote you a line from the poet Wolfgang Goethe, who would have told me, "Do not be so humble, dear sir. After all, you're not that great." So I just want to put myself into perspective. Now, how do I describe myself? Well, at one level, I am more than 66 years old. I just retired a couple of days ago after 45 years of corporate life, of corporate slavery. Not slavery, I've enjoyed it. I retired as a group president and a member of the group executive board of Mahindra. I've been with Mahindra since 2004. Before that, I was with the Tatas for 29 years. I joined the Tatas in 1975. My academic background, I'm an economist by academics, with an MBA thrown in for whatever it means. I was with Tata Steel for 21 years, and then next 7 years, I was the managing director and CEO first of Tata Metallics and then of a company called Rallis India. In the Mahindras, I look after some functions at the group level, and I look after one of their newer businesses. So that's at one level. But if I were to just say what my childhood dream was, and I know it sounds really pompous, but since this is a forum for being truthful, even if it is embarrassing, I have to say that my dream was to create a country that was free from hunger and poverty and disease, where there was hope, and where people had a standard of living that would not be an eyesore and a source of pain to those of us who were blessed to have been born in families that could give us food and shelter and clothing and education and medical attention. So that was my dream. I never meant to get into corporate life. It was almost by accident that I got in there. But frankly, perhaps it doesn't really matter, because if I feel that my real purpose in life is to drive positive change in every interaction that I have, and to unleash potential, And it was mostly in the context of creating, if you like, economic surplus, because I wanted people to be well off. So this unleashing of potential, this driving positive change, certainly at one level was in terms of creating hope and in terms of unleashing their potential as human beings, but it was equally about the productive use of resources to create income and to create investable surplus and wealth. I've often been asked, who is your ideal person? And there isn't anybody. I keep looking at almost everybody as a guru, but if a gun is put to my head and I was asked, no, you have to name somebody, I would say it would be a soldier saint, and the name that comes to my mind is Guru Gobind Singh, because that's the one soldier saint that I know of. So that's about me, and now I would be very happy, Amrita, if you could ask me some questions and I could try and answer these questions. Oh, about Satya, Prem and Seva. Yes, so now for me, Satya, Prem and Seva, I don't know where I got those words from, frankly. Maybe it's Gandhiji who talked about Satya, Prem and Seva. I'm not very sure. But for me, Satya, Prem and Seva is in the context of driving positive change, of unleashing potential, of giving passion to people to be the best that they can be through empowerment and finding meaning. And as part of this sort of ecosystem, if I may use that word, the one thing that is constant, which is the energy, which is like the flowing river, and all these other things are part of that river, is the commitment to speaking the truth, not in a bitter way, but speaking the truth, regardless of the consequences. Prem for me is compassion, and compassion is the ability to put myself into the shoes of the other person. And Seva, of course, is a sense of service and gratitude that the universe has given so much to me. And if I can do even a little bit for others, especially those who have not been so fortunate, that would be the source, the greatest source of joy and energy for me. So that, roughly speaking, is my feeble attempt, or maybe an egotistical attempt at describing myself. And how does it fit in with what all of you are experts at? My understanding about coaching really is that it is an attempt to enable people to be at their best, an attempt to enable potential to be unleashed in moving from the state which a person is in to where that person wants to go. And in that journey, how you unleash that potential by asking, by listening deeply, by asking questions that bring out the best in people, and by giving direct feedback, and doing it with a sense of service, that I want to make something better for the other person. And therefore, it is all actually about Satya, Prem and Seva. So Prem clearly is the empathy part, Satya is the direct feedback, and Seva, of course, is listening and doing something to enable the other person to get what he or she wants. Amrita, I hope that that was clear, maybe as clear as mud, but let's get on.
Of course, let me say that one of my quests in my life, and I have two. One is to see the divinity in the other, and the other is to see spirituality enter the boardroom discussions, at least in corporate India. That's my own personal quest. And from where I have observed you and the work that you have done, I feel that with this Satya, Prem and Seva, and the way that you conduct yourself personally, and of course the inspiration that you bring to the others with you, that has come closest to my quest at a personal level. And yet, this dream that you shared of yours, and the perception that we have of the corporate world being full of like cutthroat competition and deadlines and targets. How have you interwoven this aspect of Satya, Prem, and Seva to build this leadership legacy, a sense of ownership. And if you can share a few examples, then we can,
Yeah, yeah,
guide it from there.
yeah. So, the first thing I want to say is that uh, we often tend to get into an either or mode. I think somebody has called it the tyranny of either or. But in life, at least my experience has been that it's never either or. It's actually always and. The power of and the real decision that people make in their lives is in that spectrum of either or, with relation to whatever variable or aspect you're looking at, where we choose to be at any point in time. That's the real decision making. I mean, to give a crude example, how do you make a decision? How much analysis do you do, and how much intuition? Are you focused totally on the short term, or are you also looking at the long term? Are you only thinking with your head, or are you also using your heart and your soul? And the answer to all these questions is, well, it's actually both. But how much of which you use in what situation, that's really, if you like, all the leadership decision. It's also, in my humble view, that which creates, the positioning and the ability to have sustained business outperformance. So I think the world as it exists today, and now this is sort of kindergarten stuff for all of you, so forgive me. But in this world of today, which is even more volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous, and where there's a lot of pushback by all stakeholders, people don't readily agree, and they will push back on everything. Because customers, employees, shareholders always push back. Communities also. This is going to be very important. In this kind of a scenario, you cannot have sustained business outperformance if, in addition to your pure business strategy, structure, processes, and metrics, you don't show at the same time extreme care for all the stakeholders in your ecosystem, and you're very clear about your inner space. If you like, the core values you nurture and you stay. So I have come purely from a business point of view, that there is a primary task, there are resources, there is an objective. How do I unleash the maximum potential of all the resources that are there to achieve that primary task? And I find that all the things which are called soft, the Satya, Prem, and Seva Bhavna, the empathy, the empowerment, the unleashing or creation of passion, these things are so important. But they don't exist in a vacuum. They have to be combined. This is my primary task. These are my short-term goals. This is the strategy. This is the structure. This is the processes. But those things come to life and they produce much more. And they do it in a manner that brings out the best in people. If you are guided by what you refer to as the spiritual space. Now, spirituality in the boardroom has always been there. It has always been there. But, what kind of spirituality? Because ultimately, all business decisions are philosophical decisions. If you talk to somebody like Anand Mahindra, he'll say that, the one requirement of a successful CEO in the 21st century new normal is that he must be a very good philosopher. Because ultimately, all business decisions are philosophical decisions. Now, this may sound weird.
No, it sounds perfect.
And I actually come from the total world of business. In fact, till I came to Mahindra, I had never really handled HR as a separate subject. It was a big, risk that Mr. Mahindra took when he took a guy who'd done only business before and made him, the head of people practices with a small business attached. But I had always believed that it's never either or, and you have to combine the two. And And that's where it is.
So you know what you said in terms of a business person being placed within, I think it takes a visionary like Mr. Mahindra to do that. And I've always held that a business person who has people at the core of everything else really makes the best, you know, CEO, the best person to lead the ship forward, because then you're able to hold both the aspects of what you mentioned in terms of the long-term aspect of business goals and profiteering, as well as the aspect of the process of going towards that goal, you know, in a manner that is sustainable. So,
Amrita, if I may dare to just chip in, yeah, it's people but purpose. First is purpose. I mean, the starting point is the purpose, and then people to achieve that purpose, along with structure, strategy, processes, and metrics.
Of course, yeah. So the thing is that if you can share some examples from, you know, from your corporate space of like, and let me frame it in this manner, is that the way that, you know, and I'll bring it back again to Satya, Prem and Seva, is Seva I hold as, you know, what is loosely termed as servant leadership. If, you know, in terms of the act of serving the community through what you offer, the act of serving in terms of the employees as you take them forward, and that somehow seems to, you know, match. How do you think that or not do you think, let me say that, how would you say that the aspects of compassion and you know, truth, saying it for what it is. I mean, you spoke earlier about feedback and you know, giving that kind of direct feedback. How would you say that both of them, through some examples, you've been able to offer, and which has led you know, the company forward through standing strong on these principles?
Okay, so let me just take one step back, Amrita. All business, since we're talking in a business context, let's start from there, and then we'll quickly see how business and spirituality and everything else is all merged. We can't really separate them. See, all businesses are there to solve some human problems. Every business, right, is set up to solve a problem. Now, to be able to decide which problem you want to solve, you need to be able to know what problems people have. And you can do that only if you have compassion, the ability to put yourself into the shoes of the other person, right? So purely from the starting point for business and for innovation, the person who heads the business has to take a call on what is the problem that I'm seeking to solve and for whom, right? And in that quest, it helps a hell of a lot if you also have clarity about why is that, why am I doing that, right? And of course, for whom. And then you get into then what do I do and how do I do it, all of which are important, when, where, etc. Now, so compassion enables you to understand problems, right? Compassion also enables you to get or create the conditions under which your resources can be the best that they can, especially human resources, which you need from the pure point of efficiency and effectiveness and innovation, right? Then, if you peel the onion, you will see that business is all about trust, right? I mean, again, I don't want to get into kindergarten stuff for this very distinguished audience, but business is all about people trusting the product that you make, the service that you give, and knowing that it will solve the problem which it is intended to solve. If there was no trust, there would be no business. And one of the principal requirements of trust is to speak the truth, right? So from a very, very business point of view, or from the point of view of achieving any task, including government, including a spiritual or a religious organization, all these principles apply there. And frankly, truth, compassion, and a sense of service are so integral almost by definition. I wonder why people need to even ask about it. The problem comes if we put these artificial silos that this is business, it is the world of cutthroats, which it is. It also contains a lot of people who tell lies, but so does everything else, including religious organizations, if I may be permitted to say so, right? Or educational institutions. There is no difference. These are all manifestations of life and of the universe, and certain principles apply equally there. And therefore, I want to sort of make the case that spirituality and business are not two separate universes. They are completely intertwined. And from the way I'm going, you can see that this is not about promoting spirituality for its own sake. It is about saying that there is a primary task that an organization has to do, and it can achieve that primary task much better if it weaves in these views of the world that some people call spirituality.
So interesting, the way that you said it, and it makes me to me it seems like it's not about associating business with spirituality or disassociating spirituality from business, but interweaving it and integrating it, because both of them are complete in its own self. It's not that there is really a difference. It's the difference is in the difference of the way you perceive it.
Yes.
Right? And I also loved how you said about that if you have clarity about that inner space, wherever that inner space of that leader comes from, then there is this no compartmentalization of saying this works for business, this doesn't work for business, or then what works becomes universal values that you live by, irrespective of the roles that you play.
Yes, quite right. And I mean, if I may again, with your permissions,
Sure.
say that, so the inner space actually is the source of all decision making, right? So when there is a really tough decision, and as you saw, all decisions are about choosing where in a spectrum you want to be. It's very rarely that, you have a yes-no kind of it. The yes-no decisions are the easy ones.
Yeah.
The binary decisions are the easy ones. Most decisions have to choose between two very good alternatives or two bad alternatives. And, so that's where you need to refer to some sort of basic first principles. And these first principles come from the inner space. And that's why, and you can also call it purpose. So it's so important for business, in terms of deciding what you want to do and for whom, right, which is the starting point for any business, and for unleashing the potential of the system, with the resources, primarily or to a large extent people. And then through people, the technology, through people, the innovativeness of the marketing, through people, the innovativeness or smartness of the financial engineering, it all happens through people. Even the creation of algorithms is done by people. There's a lot of talk, will AI take something over? What is the context in which AI is created? What is it meant to solve? Then the human element comes in there also. And the guys who are writing the programs, they're also human beings. Right? So it's all a question of how much into the sort of atomic structure or the cosmic structure you want to get. And then the answers, funnily enough, all sort of, at least to my very sort of simple way of looking at the world, they all sort of converge.
Yeah.
They all converge. All these streams converge into what could be called life, into what could be called the universe. They all converge ultimately. Right? I think now I'm getting too abstract to make any sense.
It's the philosopher in you that's really beginning to shine.
No, but no, I don't think philosopher has any role here.
But sir, I just say is that I'm hearing from you that there is a sense of like a bedrock of that internal space and the guiding principles which you've defined for yourself as Satya, Prem, and Seva. Have you ever experienced that there's been a clash of values, my inner space and your inner space, where in the business context, and how have you handled that?
Yeah. Okay. So of course it happens all the time. It happens all the time, and I think the way, at least that I have tried to, and if I have succeeded, I have also failed. So let me not pretend that it has always been successful. No, I make no such pretense. I have had more than my share of sort of failures. But the way to solve any difference of opinion is to engage, to have what you would call a dialogue and a conversation. A lot of us, we actually avoid getting into a problem, because we have a lot of anxiety, and a classic response to anxiety is avoidance, right? Now, I believe that avoidance is not the right way to address any difference of opinion. The right way to do is to engage. And then when you're engaging, you try to not address the person and then bring it down to a personal level, that is your view, that is my view. You engage with the issues, right? And then you try to identify what is it that we are trying to do, and why is it that there is a difference of opinion. And in that process, often the differences go away. I mean, of course, we have to be willing to give and take a little bit. But I've seen it again and again and again. Now, it's not easy. Let me not give the impression that it's easy, but it's doable. And that's actually what we are doing all the time. All the time. Every time a business decision has to be made, we go through this process. That, should we do this or should we do that? And they are conflicting, and somebody thinks this and somebody else thinks that. And then we get together, we sit down, we discuss, and sometimes we are able to converge. Other times you're not able to converge, and then you say, okay, but we have a time deadline. And so we have to take a decision, and then somebody called the leader or whoever is in charge of the decision making takes a decision, right? And that decision, if he or she has taken, after hearing all the voices, after not trying to put the problem under the carpet or plunging into action without even understanding what the problem is. That happens all the time. We don't spend enough time in understanding what is actually the problem, for which you have to do a lot of peeling of the onion. We want to get into action straight away, and we want to get into the how of things without spending enough time on the why. And the what, and which in turn is very deeply connected with this question of who am I, right? So, but this kind of stuff we give it different names in the corporate world, but we are actually doing it all the time. Now, you told me, can you give me an example? So let me give you an example. There was a very senior colleague of mine who, in the beginning, I just couldn't stand the sight of that guy. Anything that he said, I would find distasteful, I would find egotistical, I would, just really not like that person at all. And it was creating a lot of issues in our being able to work together, because he was a very important guy. And I had to actually work with him. So one day I said, look, there's something wrong maybe with the lens with which I'm seeing this person. Why don't I throw out my narrative of that guy as being egotistical, self-driven, doesn't care about others, and let me try and see him as actually a very good person who is trying to do things which he thinks is right. And let me just, change, the lens through which I'm looking to him and try to understand what he's doing. Now, the minute I started doing that, everything that he did and said, which I used to interpret in a particular way, actually started changing. And now we are the best of friends. We trust each other. But what it required was for me to change the lens, maybe for me to get rid of my ego, if you like, because, clearly I was feeling threatened by him. I was, sense of insecurity vis-a-vis him. He's so smart, he's so clever, I'm not so smart, I'm dumb. What will people think that I can't even come up with half the clever ideas? So all those things got mixed up there. But once I said, let me try and, put my own ego aside, and I didn't use that word, but let me just try and look at him differently. Right? Things changed completely. Now, there have been many cases where I have not been able to do that. I must sort of tell you, there's one person who after, how many years now? After 16 years, I still, if I see that guy, my blood starts boiling. So I don't want to give the impression that I'm a saint who sort of resolves everything. I have my issues also, but I have found generally, the path of Satya, Prem, and Seva in the context of a primary task, led by a purpose, a higher order purpose, that generally creates a space for finding solutions that work.
Thank you for sharing so openly and vulnerably. And you say, don't let me give the impression of a saint, even though you look like one completely. And
oh God, really?
is the way that I see you. And from what you shared, so what it triggers for me is that, was it that that you started looking at the other person with the purity of your heart? Or did you look at that person, the purity that existed in that person, or the way that you wished to see that person? And it may seem a little convoluted as I'm asking this question itself, but I really want to get to that inner space that you spoke about. And how did that come to the surface for you to be able to shift that perspective?
Yeah, so I shifted that perspective from a very practical point of view. But when I have reflected on this, I think that what we see in other people or in a situation is a reflection of ourselves.
Sure.
Okay, so that's what I think. Now, I have not thought it through. As I said, I'm not Maharishi Ramanna or Jesus Christ or the Prophet Muhammad or Zoroaster or anybody like that. So I can't say that I have fully experienced that. But I just intuitively feel that because I've experimented with myself. Why is it that I like some people? Why is it that I immediately have good, positive vibration with some people, and with some people I don't?
Yeah.
Which is a fact. And then I discover that a lot of it has to do with my own self. In a sense, and there's a good old, I think it's an American proverb, it could even be Zen. It says, there is nothing out there, which really means that everything that we experience is a reflection of who we are. Right? We are seeing in the outside world some kind of a reflection, if you like, of who we are deep inside, our emotions, our fears, our whatever. And then we start seeing in other people something, either what we are or what we aspire to be, or what we are afraid of. But all of them are reflections of what our inner space is all about. And to the extent that we can perceive that, to the extent that we can see ourselves, and I'm sorry I'm using Maharishi Ramanna's language right now, but if I can be the observer of my own self, that I think helps to create better, more productive working relationships. Purely now I'm talking about it in the context of there is a task to be done, there are some resources, how do we get the best solution in the most effective and efficient way with the resources that we have. And all these things help in finding that solution.
You have paved the path so beautifully to this aspect of what you see in the other, and that's really how we all hold the space of coaching, to say that all that a coach does is really shows the mirror to the other person, And in our coach training program, which I know that you blocked the dates to join us in November. But in what we always say in that is that when you spot it, you got it. Similar to what you shared, that you can only see what already exists within you in some form or the other. And I know from many of my friends and colleagues who have had the good fortune of being with you for many years, and in some of the videos that you shared with me, that you've played a great role of a coach and a mentor as well.
Without knowing what that means. Right?
Without knowing what that is, and I think that everybody who gets drawn, I think, to coaching at some level has done some of that coaching intuitively, because I think it is also an intuitive process. Yes, you get a structure, you get a certification, but you're generally driven by the aspect of wanting to serve another person, and this that's why I said the Satya, Prem, and Seva is intrinsic to coaching. Either we may call it differently, we may hold it differently, but in essence it's very much part of the profession that all of us are part of. And so if you could please share with us some of your examples of grooming talent, setting succession plans through coaching and mentoring, where this aspect of Satya, Prem, and Seva has found its way. And it'll be meaningful for us to understand.
Okay, so now that's a sort of very difficult question, but let me give my experience of the last 16 years. All our business decisions and all our human capital practices, especially leadership development, actually come from one sentence, which is our core purpose. And I don't want to bore you with the details of that, but essentially, for us, the core purpose is about driving positive change in the lives of our stakeholders and communities to enable them to rise. And then, once you start unpeeling that, all the human capital practices come up, leadership development comes up, and what we get is we call it the 3+5 framework, 3 attitudes and 5 behaviors, and all of them draw upon the basic idea that we want to run our businesses through people in a way that drives positive change, both inside the organization and vis-a-vis our external stakeholders, and to do it in a way that unleashes the potential of people and of systems by creating a certain passion in them, right? And we believe that this passion comes from providing empowerment and from providing meaning to the work that people are doing. And these, in turn, come directly from the purpose which leads an organization. Then clearly you break it up into the nuts and bolts of all the HR leaders. And that's the other thing that, I have learned in life, that, most things are actually a network of ideas, a network of levers, if you like, or processes. And if you address only one or two, then you may not get a powerful result, right? Now, I'm often told, oh, but life is all about choosing, and you have to choose. I don't want to get into that, but I believe that you have to address the network. So you have to work on all the HR levers. So if you want to create, for example, for us, one of the big requirements of a leader is that he or she should be able to create trust. Okay, so trust is a very, very big aspect of everything that we do. Now, you cannot have trust unless your thinking, saying, and doing are aligned, right? If you like, I think the Harvard people call it knowing, doing, and being, right? So all three have to be aligned. Now, this is also walking the talk. This is also taking off the mask. You can call it what you will. Now, how do you do that? Now, clearly, if you have a reward and recognition system that does not reward people who create trust, but rewards the cutthroats, then you have a problem. Similarly, if your performance management system is based on metrics and on conversations that poo-poo, the alignment of thinking, doing, and saying, then you have a problem. If the role models that you're going to talk about emphasize not trust but something else, then you have a problem. When you're recruiting, when you're onboarding, your learning and development processes, all the communication that takes place is emphasizing something else, and you're saying that you want to create trust. So all the HR levers have to be aligned. So essentially, to answer your questions, how do we do leadership development, which draws upon this basic idea? We have aligned all the HR levers, and it's taken us years, and it's actually work in process. So that at least institutionally, we are trying to make sure that we maximize the possibility that people work and behave in a manner that drives positive change. Right? And then we break it up into other components so that the network all pulls in the same direction. But finally, if you ask me, what matters the most is how people actually behave. If the leadership particularly is not living driving positive change, if they're not living creating trust through authenticity, then you can say and do you can create as many processes and as many levers as you like. But if the behavior is at variance, then you will end up doing nothing. So it's a marathon race. It's not a 100-meter dash. And hopefully, at least we believe that, this whole spirit of rise, driving positive change, is something that should be a never-ending quest. The idea of having a quest like this is not that you have to achieve it, but that you have to keep striving for it. In fact, the moment you think you got it, or that you've reached there, that is the end.
Yeah.
That is the end. So again, now we're getting into a philosophical point here, maybe a very practical point. That is life about the achievement, or is it about the process of getting to what you want to achieve? What is more significant? And that brings you to the whole concept of, life is about here and now. Which is, of course, one of our 5 leadership behaviors. That life is a continuum of nows, and that's, of course, pure logic. But if in each of these nows, you don't live what you want to live, or you don't do the things that you would like to do, then life passes you by, because none of the moments, which is the only reality, is how you would like it to be. And therefore, you end up thinking about a wasted past. You have lots of doubts and fears about the future, and you never live the present. Whereas if you live today well, then every yesterday is a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Such is my salutation to the dawn. That's the poet Kalidas. There's more to that poem, but roughly speaking.
So the thing is that, it seems to me that as you share it, and I'm sure that a large portion of the team that you led and ran, and the senior leadership team, even as I have interacted with them, definitely, are role modeling a lot of what you say. And at the same time, I would say that there may be times when that doesn't happen, and when there is that alignment between what you say, do, and who you are goes off track. And as a leader, or as a member of the team responsible for people at large, they need to give then that so-called developmental feedback, because it is developmental from a perspective of bringing them in alignment. How is that truth or Satya conveyed to them in a manner. Yes, I'm sure that if you had to do it, it would definitely be with the love and compassion and in service of their higher interest. I get that. But to have that sustained throughout the, throughout the management or throughout the what leadership pipeline, such that there are no blockages, or the blockages are identified and eliminated, so that there's a continuous flow of this amazing energy that is created. What would be your response?
Okay, so let me just give you a sort of simple answer. Actually, as I said, it's through all the HRD work, right?
Yeah.
But a very important part of the feedback that we give is through a 360 feedback instrument that we have created, which is based on our 3+5, which actually tells you how people are perceiving you in terms of the 3+5. And it's a very detailed feedback. I mean, it's broken up like all sort of, in my opinion, far too complicated tools of psychometrics, which I don't understand. It's about 64 questions, but it gives you, a feedback. And now, what do you do with that feedback? I mean, you can, give it to that person. What that person chooses to do with the feedback is not something that you control. But if you keep talking about this all the time, and that's where actually the leadership is so important, because, if the leader is living these, and if he's constantly referring to, is it driving positive change? Are you driving positive change? Or are you, creating trust? And then the decisions we take when it comes to promotions, when it comes to giving people new responsibility, those decisions are based on conversations about, does this person satisfy what we are looking for in our leader? In addition, of course, to having the competence. So we are looking not only at technical competence, but we are also looking at the inner space. And we look at that inner space, through these sort of psychometrics that have been created, especially around our 3+5 framework, plus the conversations that we have from people. We don't go only by what would come out in a psychometric. We also have plenty of conversations. And then we try and make sure that those who are living these values, in addition to getting good business results, are the people who are projected, are the people who get important positions, are the people who are held up in role models. Now, in Mahindra's, we don't do it in a very obvious way. People don't wear badges or carry a sign saying I'm a 3+5. We don't do it that way. It's sort of more subtle, but it becomes clear to people. But mostly it's about, how often do we talk about this? What is the cooler talk? What is the bathroom conversation? And when it reaches that level where everybody is seeing that these principles produce good business results, and that those who follow these principles will achieve their primary task in the context of whatever is their role and their function, then the culture starts getting created. But I think it's a process of osmosis, if you like. It happens slowly. And often you have to hasten slowly. If you've heard that phrase, hasten slowly. And it's a long, never-ending race. It's not a dash. You can't do it in a year. I mean, you try very hard. It's not that you postpone. But to think that you can create a whole culture in 6 months or 3 months, and then you don't have to work on it, that's not possible. You have to keep working on it all the time. And you will fall down many times. You will have failures, but then you learn from that failure. And you sort of leverage the learnings from failure, because there will be plenty of failure. And then you keep going back and then analyzing and seeing and how can we improve and stuff like that. And then you sort of, if you like, muddle your way through, pretending as if you know what to do.
It seems to me, sir, that, two things. One is that I really liked how you said that. One is that it's a never-ending quest. And the other is the aspect that you hasten slowly. And I think with the two of them, if if the compass is one where uh, everyone is like living, breathing, and talking the same kind of language around it, then that really leads to the sustainability of these principles. And also, I mean, it goes to the breadth of it, as well as the depth of it within the organization, but more importantly, contributes to that it stays and it creates that level of stickiness within the
Yeah.
organization.
And Amrita, a very important point is that these things don't have to be treated as abstract principles on their own. They have to be all interwoven with solving business problems.
Of
I
course.
think that is the context in which these principles are talked about have to be the primary task. I think that is a very, very important point. Oftentimes, the path to not achieving what you want is sort of woven with good intentions that
Yeah.
are not used in the right context. I
Yeah.
mean, we cannot forget, I mean, that we are, after all, we are a business organization.
Mm.
We are there to solve certain problems of certain people through certain products and services. Now, how do we best solve that? And then all these principles that I'm talking about are highlighted or discussed in the context of the primary task of the organization and of the people. Then it makes sense.
And the thing is, but I would hold, and you may, I'd love to hear if you feel the same or differently, but the intent comes first, and it gets married into the context, and it gets reinforced with the context. But I think that that inner space or that intention, that this is what we want to stand for, this is what we want to uphold, and yes, that it is purposefully driven, there is a purpose, and there are people who run it, and it is translated. But the intent, I think, the purity of that intent holds greater value. Would you
Yeah.
say?
No, you're right that the intent must come first. But if the intent is not accompanied by action,
Of course.
then it's worthless. So I'm sorry,
I
it's not
agree.
worthless. It's not
I,
worthless, but then you're not really harnessing the power of that intent.
yeah.
That's all I want. But you're absolutely right. The intent has to be there first, and then you have to have the attention, and then the action finally, and then that action has to feed back into the intent. So
Sure.
you're right. The starting point would be the intent, but the intent without a context or without subsequent action, would then not be doing justice to the power of the intent.
So the philosopher is important, but the business leader is as important, and and therefore they're two sides of the same coin. But that would be perfect, right?
Yes, I mean the two have to be combined. I wouldn't say they are two sides of the same coin, but they are two sides must reflect each other.
Yeah.
Right. I mean the two have to be completely sort of intertwined.
Yeah.
Right? And give energy to the other.
I agree fully. So I just want to shift gears really into the space, and like I've shared with you earlier as well, is I choose not to give energy so much to what is called as a global pandemic, and at the same time, it's important to acknowledge that it is here and it is our current reality. And therefore, there's some questions, meaningful questions, I would say, is that that have come in specifically to this situation that we're facing. And how would you see that this? Or let me ask it differently. What would be your response to this global pandemic? How are you viewing it? What's your perspective? And then I'll take the specific questions.
Yeah, sure. So I think that this situation is one of very high uncertainty and anxiety and fear. We don't have enough information, and certainly not enough knowledge about the virus. Right. So now in this situation of uncertainty, lack of information, lack of knowledge, and the fear and the anxiety that is accompanying the situation, the role of the leader becomes very important in this kind of a situation. And I think that in a crisis of this kind, the leader has to do a few fundamental things. Number one is that the leader has to be connected to the reality. The leader cannot live in a world that has no connection with the reality, right? So whatever the leader says and does has to be connected with the reality that the leader sees and the reality that people are seeing, right? Having said that, the leader has to create hope. So he is realistic about the existence of a problem, the fact that we don't have enough information, and yet he must hold out hope. And he must have, or she, sorry, she, let me say she, my apologies to all the ladies here. It's about being, reflecting reality, about creating hope, and about having empathy in the relationships that the leader has with her people. Now, in a situation of this kind, there are two things that are required. Number one is that the problem requires what can be called distributed leadership. If any one person tries to micromanage in a situation like this and does not empower people, it will be a disaster. I think the role of the leader has to be to set the direction, to articulate the values, and then leave it to the experts and to the people who are out there. In this case, out there in the hospitals, out there on the roads, out there in the wards or wherever. They have to be given direction, they have to be given the values, and then they have to be given the freedom to be able to take decisions on the spot. So distributed leadership, psychological safety has to be created so that people are not afraid to report bad news, right? So news must travel fast, especially in a situation like this. If there is bad news, it should not be hidden. It must be conveyed straight so that people can know what is the problem, or people can tackle it with a sense of reality. So I think, therefore, to get back, what is required, as I said, the leader has to set the direction, which is based on reality as seen by the leader and as seen by the other people. The leader must give hope to the people. The leader must have empathy. Having said that, the leader must get out of the way and not interfere with the micro decisions that need to be taken by the people who are right there on the coal face, if you like, or out there in the battlefield. Then keep learning and keep having dialogue, hearing the views of people and trying to take decisions very quickly. Sometimes they'll be right and sometimes they'll be wrong. But in a situation like this, you can't take too much time to take decisions. You have to be very quick. So that, roughly speaking, I think is what. Then, of course, you have to have some element of risk management, right? What is it that is most at risk? Now, how do you define risk? So you have to find out those things that have high impact, even if they have low likelihood. So you have to have some, if you like, a chief worry officer whose only job is to think. And then what happens is that the problem keeps shifting. In the sort of management jargon, there are things that are known as constraints, which is the critical constraint. Now that constraint itself may keep shifting. Now, unless you have this nimble and agile kind of decision-making structure and process and the people and what I just said about empowerment and trust and how do you give psychological safety so that people can also vent their fear, you won't get a good result. With all this, of course, you may still not get a good result.
So I see that the role then of Satya, Prem and Seva, and going back to that same thread, seems to get more enhanced.
Of course.
In situations like this,
Without any doubt.
And how would you say that that gets manifested or can be manifested on a day-to-day basis, where there is no, I mean, you don't know what today's truth is different from tomorrow's truth. It may change completely, right?
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
and the sense of being able to serve, even if one wants to serve in a position of a lockdown, how do you serve, and how do you make all of that happen?
Yeah, so, so very clearly you have to identify that when there is a lockdown, what is it that people need?
Hmm.
So your service has to address the problems that people will have. People need food. People need medical attention. People may need access to certain things. People need information. People also need some connection with other human beings. So these are the problems that the leadership must then try to address and solve. And the seva has to be in the context of these problems.
So
And
then,
to know what these problems are, they have to have prem, empathy, compassion, to put yourself into the shoes of the other person. And they have to be realistic, which is about commitment to the truth. They have to allow information to flow, that they have to create the psychological safety, which is through prem. For news to travel up and down, you have to empower people, which is also through prem. So this way one can see that all the very practical things that are required in a situation at present, which is of high uncertainty, fear, total lack of information and knowledge. How do you keep acting and learning and acting again, making mistakes, learning from it, without disrupting the entire social fabric and still giving hope to people? Not false hope, but the hope that you have a leadership that is doing all these things.
and then in such a situation, how would you balance what one participant asked, and I loved how she articulated it, the human quotient and the business quotient? Because the business quotient, the uncertainty around that, I mean, I can build that connection with my teams every morning when I have a conversation with them. I'm, using Zoom more extensively. I'm connecting probably more now than I was when I was back in office. But how do you manage the reality that business is down and may continue to go down? So the business quotient and the human quotient, how will you hold the two together?
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I don't have the answer, but you have to clearly address both. But at different times, the priority may be different, right? For clearly at this time, the decision that has been taken and right through the world in most places is that the first priority is to save human lives. And then as you succeed in saving human lives, in what they call flattening the curve so that your medical system is not overstrained, then clearly you have to start bringing in the livelihood. So I think Mr. Modi's slogans, which is there everywhere in the world, reflect this. I think he's now talking about lives and livelihood. Before that, he was "Jab jaan hai to something hai," he said. I forget. I'm afraid I don't remember the full slogan. But I remember, that the first priority was that you have to be alive. And then when you have succeeded somewhat in keeping people alive, then you have to make sure that they don't die because of hunger and starvation or by committing suicide because they're so depressed. So it's a classic case of how the problem will keep shifting. And then people will have to have their own algorithms, which comes out of their values, really, on which problem acquires more importance at what point in time. But clearly both have to be addressed. Now, I really, don't want to pretend that I have an answer, but it's so obvious that both have to be addressed. And yet, what do you give priority to when that's there? And then, if somebody says, we don't have money, and how do we pay our people? That's correct. Now, there also many solutions will come up. The Reserve Bank of India, the banking system, the government. Now, if you see, all kinds of measures will be unrolled. Now, will this reach the people? So liquidity is the most, liquidity and purchasing power. How do you create that? There's a whole slew of measures. Now, this conversation is not about that, but I spent the whole day today and many days sitting in webinars. So today was the National Executive Committee of FICCI, where precisely the livelihood issues were being discussed. And there were some ministers. Okay, so we had the chairman of the State Bank of India. He came and interacted with what the State Bank of India is doing and Reserve Bank is doing. Then we had Nitin Gadkari come and tell about all the things that is being done for MSMEs and SMEs and on the transport sector. And then this Piyush Goyal came and talked. So there's a lot of things that they are doing for addressing livelihoods. But clearly the first focus has been on, can we get a hold on saving lives so that this terrible infection doesn't spread so much that it creates a havoc at a level which you can do nothing about. So they're trying to contain this problem, and then now they will have to start addressing with more and more priority the livelihood. So it's a balancing. It's a great example of how nothing in life is either or. It's always and the real decision is where in the spectrum of either or you choose to be at which point in time. Which is classically, this is what is happening. And who knows what the right answer is.
And I think that the aspect of it's not just either or, it is also, this is the time for the values that internal space that you hold to really, come alive in much more ways than it's probably had any need to earlier. And that still continues to be your GPS in all your interactions, whether it's at home or with your community or wherever that may be.
Absolutely.
However dark the clouds may seem because of the uncertainty and the anxiety, what I really connected with deeply is to see the sense of oneness and the sense of connection, and how not just at a family level unit in supporting in the household chores, but even the whole aspect of the whole nation coming together, whole world coming together, and just I think that the whole aspect of a common purpose is seeming to gain so much more weightage in life. How would you say that this thing can be sustained after this? After this will pass, of course it will pass. It is temporary, but the lessons that we've learned from it, the way that we've all combated it together, how do you think that this can be there, can sustain beyond this pandemic? And what would be your thoughts?
Okay, almost an impossible question to answer, but here is my hope.
Yeah.
So number one, I think that the impact of what we are going through is going to be fairly permanent, in the sense that I think there will be some fundamental shifts in patterns of consumption and distribution and an approach to how we do things. That is definitely going to happen. I think there are going to be some profound geopolitical shifts. I think distribution and production will change geographies. That is certainly going to happen. I think for some time there will be a profound re-examination of, why are we doing what we are doing? But, the fact of the matter is that mankind has been through similar things before. And while each such calamity has brought about some permanent changes, I don't think that they have permanently reversed all human behavior. So to think that we will enter into an age, into an era of universal and global cooperation, I hope it will be so. But does the history of mankind show that? Not entirely. Certainly there is perhaps more collaboration perhaps than before, but there is equally a lot of conflict that takes place, both across nations, within nations, everything. There is conflict, and yet there is cooperation. So I guess there will continue to be the coexistence of collaboration and conflict. I don't think we'll get away from that. I just hope that some of the changes that happen will connect us more deeply to our basic human needs, will connect us more deeply to the recognition of the fact that we are destroying Mother Earth, and there is perhaps some limit to how much you can rape and pillage Mother Earth. So I hope all those things happen, and that the world is a somewhat better place. But having said that, there will still be conflict, there will still be inequality, there will still be injustice. But hopefully there will be, to counterbalance that, more of love, more of seva, more of truth, and till humankind lives, we will have the coexistence, is what I think. But I'm not a historian, I'm not a seer, I'm not a saint, and I certainly am not a global leader. But since you asked for my view, this is what I think.
And I would say, sir, that the space that you hold in my heart is that you definitely, in the way that you engage with driving positive change, no matter where you go, you definitely write history. The history for other people to see, whichever way you call it. I mean, it is I think that it is inspirational, and I say it to you with the genuineness of my heart. And at the same time, I think that the poetic manner in which you speak, gives such a beautiful flavor to how it is received by the other. So, in how would you say, as we in closing, would be the three, and I'm re-paraphrasing something that Hari asked on chat currently. How would you say the three things that all of us as individual human beings would need to focus on to be able to take the lessons that we have learned uh, through this pandemic, individually and collectively, to build our own world, however we perceive it, on the edifice of Satya, Prem, and Seva? What would you say as three key things to action? I mean, intent is not enough. What would you say is your action that we all should take forward?
Wow. $64 million question, totally unprepared for it. So I certainly think we need to have a lot of connection, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of clarity about why we do something, which in turn, the why is connected to having some understanding of who am I. Right? So I would say then the three things, I would say first is some clarity on who am I, and which in turn decides why I do something. So that's number one. Number two is connecting with human beings, connecting with nature, connecting with silence or whatever. So connecting, but especially with other human beings. And the third is collaborating with human beings, or with other human beings, especially those who you don't like or you don't care for, and also collaborating with nature. These are the three. I'm sorry, I said it on the fly. I haven't thought it through.
It's perfect. It came straight from your heart. I know that we both spoke so much about preparing for this and then going with the flow, and this is a perfect demonstration of it. And I see the way that I have received it, and I'll say it quintessential to my profession as a coach. I have three questions to ask ourselves each day. Would be, who am I? What am I here to contribute? And how am I going to serve in a manner that it is collaborative and allows for connection, in the way that you said it. Thank you so much. It has been distinct honor and pleasure to have you here. You know, it's it's overwhelming at one level and heartening as well, for us to be able to have this conversation so openly and share so completely. It's very special to me. The truth which you shared is demonstrative to me of Satya. The love that was so palpable is the Prem, and the willingness to just be here and serve in the evening, when you could have been with your family. You've chosen to be with us so selflessly, is something that I'm deeply grateful for. I know our paths will keep crossing, and till then, thank you so much.
Thank you, Amrita, for creating this very unique space and time. And my gratitude to everybody who's there on the call, and my prayers that you should take care and be safe. And God be with you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we will all come through. And as you said, this too shall pass. I hope that it passes without too much damage.
If you were to look at the chat box, you'll see all the great gratitude that's just flowing in on the chat box. And I take this time to thank each one of you who've made the time to be here. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed creating it and delivering it to you. And we will all see each other again very soon, in person and otherwise. Thank you. Thank you so much. I request Nidhi to unmute everyone so you can show your face and say bye-bye and good night. And
thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Good night. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It was amazing to have listening of from Mr. Dubey, and that's really great. For me, especially joining from Dubai, I think it's one of the best and maybe one of the amazing conversations I have done. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Rajeev.
you.
Thank you, Amrita. Thank you, Mr. Raj. Amazing session. Amazing session. God bless.
Thank you, Rajeev. This is Dinesh from California. I had to get up early to listen to you, but wonderful. Thank you so much for your beautiful thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate them very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. Amazing resonance with all that we have done together with Peter Redding and the polarity thinking and the trust. Really loved the session. First time experiencing Rajeev, and thanks for introducing him to all of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Anil. Okay, with that, I'm going to say good night. And thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nidhi and I are waiting on to continue our conversation and enjoy all the appreciation that has come through this chat box. So feel free to exit. Okay, Nidhi, we'll chat soon and later. Thank you so much.
All right. You can stop the recording.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Thank you for reminding me.